I want to tell you something I've never said out loud. The morning Marcus left, I was already 3 weeks into reviewing Diane Calloway's financial records, not as his wife, not as someone who suspected anything. As the forensic accountant assigned to case hash ATL 2024-0093 by the Atlanta field office of the FBI. He packed a bag on a Sunday, folded his shirts the way I taught him, set his keys on the counter like he was leaving for a work trip. I didn't stop him. I knew something he didn't. And I had learned a long time ago that the truth doesn't need your help arriving. It just needs time. Before we go any further, what time is it where you are right now? Drop your time and your country in the comments. I want to know who's here for this one. People always said Marcus Ellison married down, not to my face. Never to my face. But I heard it the way you hear things in a marriage, through silences, through the way his mother looked at my hands at dinner, through the careful pauses his colleagues left after asking what I did for a living. And I said the word accountant without any decorative titles attached to it. Marcus was the kind of man who needed a room to know he had arrived. He needed the right car in the right parking spot, the right table at the right restaurant. He needed people to see him being seen. I understood that about him early. I think I loved him partly because of it, that hunger, that forward lean into the world. When we met at a mutual friend's birthday in Buckhead 11 years ago, he was the loudest person in the room, and I was standing near the window watching the rain. He walked over and said, "You look like you're solving something." I told him I probably was. We were married 2 years later. For 7 of our 9 years together, it was good. Not loud good the way Marcus preferred things, but solid. We had a 2-bedroom in Decatur with a porch we actually used. We had a savings account we both contributed to without being asked. We had Sunday mornings where he made eggs, and I made coffee, and neither of us had to perform anything for anyone. The shift started when Diane Calloway promoted him to VP of Sales. I remember the night he came home with the news. October, 14 months before he left. He stood in the kitchen doorway, still in his coat, and his face looked different, not just happy, but rearranged, like something had been moved to a more prominent position inside him. "She chose me," he said. Not I got the promotion. She chose me. I remember thinking that was an unusual way to say it. Diane Calloway ran Calloway Logistics like it was a performance. The company was real warehousing freight contracts, last-mile delivery across the Southeast, but the way she ran it felt theatrical. The retreats, the all-hands meetings where she gave speeches that people described as inspiring but couldn't quite paraphrase afterward. The culture of loyalty she'd built that looked from the outside like a tight team and felt from the inside more like a closed system. I knew about Calloway Logistics professionally before I knew about Diane Calloway personally. That's the detail that matters. That's the thing I need you to hold on to. My official title at the time was Senior Forensic Accountant at Reeves & Carmichael, a mid-sized audit firm in Midtown Atlanta with 3 federal contracts. I had worked there for 6 years. I was not the most visible person in the office. I wore the same 4 blazers on rotation. I ate lunch at my desk most days. My supervisor, a careful woman named Helen Park, once told me that I had the rarest quality in our profession. I could look at a column of numbers and hear what was wrong with them. "Most people read financials," she said. "You listen to them. What I heard in other people's numbers, I sometimes missed in my own life. That is the honest version of this story. After Marcus's promotion, things changed in small ways that I cataloged without meaning to. He started going in earlier, staying later. He bought 2 new suits without mentioning it. And I found the receipt in the dry cleaning bag, Canali $1, 400 each. He began using words Diane apparently used, ecosystem instead of team, intentional as a general-purpose adjective. She really sees the vision, as a conclusion to stories about work I hadn't fully followed. He downloaded a meditation app he never opened. He stopped asking about my cases. That last one I noticed most. For years, Marcus had asked about my work with genuine curiosity, not the technical details, but the shape of the stories. Who was hiding what? How you could tell. He liked the detective quality of it. Around month 3 after the promotion, he stopped asking. I told myself he was busy. I told myself this was what success looked like in a person, and I should let him have it without measuring everything. I let it go. I let a lot of things go that year. The savings account was one of them. In January, 8 months before he left, Marcus suggested we move our joint savings into separate accounts for financial independence. He framed it as modern, healthy something he'd read about. I agreed without pushback. I was in the middle of a complicated audit, and I didn't have the bandwidth to examine why the suggestion bothered me. I signed the paperwork on a Wednesday evening and made us dinner, and didn't think about it again until much later, when I would think about it constantly. Sunday mornings on the porch became Saturday mornings, then occasional mornings, then just me and my coffee and the specific quiet of a house where someone is physically present but already somewhere else. I want to be clear about something. I was not naive. I was occupied. There is a difference, and it matters, and I spent a long time making sure I understood which one it was. By the time Marcus packed that bag on a Sunday in late September, I had been assigned to case hash ATL 2024-0093 for 22 days. I had already reviewed 4 years of Callaway Logistics financial statements. I had already flagged 17 transactions that didn't reconcile with the company's reported revenue. I had already seen a name recurring in the authorization column of contracts that should have gone through procurement. His name, Marcus Ellison, VP of Sales. I sat across from him at dinner the Thursday before he left. He talked about a conference call. I passed him the salt. I thought about the file sitting in my work bag by the front door. And I said nothing because there was a legal process underway. And I was part of it. And because I had learned in 6 years of forensic accounting that the worst thing you can do when you find something is move too fast. The eggs on Sunday morning were the last ones he made. He left before noon. I watched his car back out of the driveway from the kitchen window. Then I washed both mugs, put them away, and called Helen to tell her I'd be coming in early Monday. The first sign wasn't what you'd expect. It wasn't lipstick. It wasn't a text message I wasn't supposed to see. It wasn't a late night with an explanation that had too many details packed into it. Those are the signs people look for because those are the signs that get talked about. The real signs are quieter. They live in the texture of ordinary moments, and you only recognize them later when you're sitting alone with enough stillness to finally hear what you were already hearing. For me, the first sign was a Sevat. Marcus owned 14 ties. I know that number because I organized his closet twice a year, spring and fall, and I knew exactly where each one lived. He was particular about it. Ties hung by color, family lightest to darkest left to right. It was one of the small systems we had built together, without ever discussing it, the kind of domestic architecture that holds a marriage up from underneath, without either person acknowledging the load-bearing walls. In early December, 13 months before he left, I was hanging up his winter coat and found a tie folded into the inside pocket. Not loosely tucked. Folded. Deliberately, carefully folded into a neat rectangle the way you'd fold something you needed to carry without wrinkling. It was his Navy Ermenegildo Segna, the one I gave him for our 7th anniversary. I stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at it. Then I hung the coat up, unfolded the tie, and put it back in its correct position in the closet. I didn't say anything, not because I was afraid of the answer, because I wasn't ready to make the question official yet. There is a version of not knowing that you choose, and I am honest enough to admit I chose it for a little while. The signs kept coming after that, each one small enough to dismiss individually. He started carrying breath mints. Marcus had never carried breath mints in 11 years. He was a gum person. Trident spearmint always in the center console of his car. In January, I found an Altoids tin in his jacket pocket nearly empty. I put it back. He changed his phone passcode in February. I knew because I occasionally used his phone to check the time when mine was charging. And one evening, my muscle memory failed me and the wrong code rejected. He reset it the next morning when he thought I was in the shower. The sound of the confirmation click carried down the hall clearly in a quiet house. He started working out again. This one I might have celebrated. Marcus had talked about getting back to the gym for 2 years, except that he went at 6 a.m. before work rather than evenings, which meant he was showering there and arriving at the office already dressed. I only realized this when I noticed his gym bag was always packed and always returned empty and always smelled of hotel soap instead of our soap. There was one evening in March that I returned to sometimes. We were watching television a Tuesday. Nothing significant on the calendar. His phone lit up on the coffee table between us. He reached for it faster than the situation required. Not a lunge, just a half-second of speed that didn't match the casualness of the evening. He glanced at the screen, put it face down, and said nothing. I kept my eyes on the television. The show was a cooking competition. Someone was making a soufflé. I remember thinking soufflés fail because of sudden temperature changes, and I remember thinking that was an apt thing to be watching. I want to say I confronted him that night. I didn't. What I did instead was what I always do. With incomplete information, I kept collecting. I am a forensic accountant. I do not move on a hunch. I move on a pattern, and a pattern requires more than one data point, and even then, you document before you act. It is a professional discipline that became a personal one somewhere along the way. And that night on the couch, I wasn't sure if that was a strength or a damage I had done to myself over 6 years of looking at other people's lives for a living. The professional context matters here, and I need to be careful about how I say this. In March, the same month as the Tuesday evening on the couch, I sat in on a preliminary briefing at the Federal Field Office on Peachtree Street. It was the first time I heard the name Callaway Logistics spoken in an official capacity outside my own office. The case had been building for 14 months. It originated from a tip filed by a former Callaway employee who had noticed irregularities in the company's freight contract billings, specifically contracts awarded to shell vendors that existed on paper but had no operational footprint. No employees, no physical address beyond a registered agent in Delaware. I was in that meeting as an outside forensic reviewer not yet formally assigned. I took notes. I asked 3 questions. I drove home and made dinner, and Marcus was already there on the phone laughing at something. And he held up one finger when I walked in one moment, and I set my bag down by the door, the bag with the preliminary briefing notes inside it, and I went to the kitchen and started on the rice. That was March. By April, the savat had stopped appearing in his coat pocket. Whatever discretion he'd been practicing, he'd gotten better at it, or the relationship had moved past the stage that required discretion. There was one final detail from that period that I didn't understand until much later. In late April, Marcus mentioned at dinner that Diane had asked him to be a co-signatory on several vendor contracts, going forward, a sign of trust. He said a mark of how much she valued his judgment. He was pleased about it in the way he was pleased about most things involving Diane by then, which was to say openly, without noticing my expression. "You're comfortable signing contracts you haven't reviewed?" I asked. He looked at me the way he'd been looking at me for months by then, like I was applying the wrong framework to a situation I didn't fully understand. "It's standard practice, Victoria. It means she trusts me." I nodded. I finished my dinner. I thought about what a signature on a contract actually means in a federal fraud investigation, and I kept that thought exactly where it was filed, noted, dated, and I said nothing more about it. That was the last dinner I remember feeling like we were still the same two people who had stood in a church 9 years earlier and meant what we said. After that, we were just two people eating in the same kitchen, moving toward different outcomes at different speeds with very different information. It was a Friday, not a dramatic Friday. Not a Friday with storm clouds or a significant date on the calendar. A regular Atlanta Friday in late September, when the heat had finally started to loosen its grip. This ton and the evenings were almost comfortable, and people were making plans for the weekend like the world was ordinary. I came home at 6:23 p.m. I know the exact time because I checked my phone in the parking garage, a habit from years of time-stamping everything. I had stopped at the Publix on Ponce and bought salmon and a lemon and a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc that was on sale. I was thinking about a discrepancy in a subledger I'd flagged that afternoon. I was thinking about whether to call my sister back that evening or wait until Sunday. I was not thinking about Marcus, which tells you something about where we were by then. He had become a background condition of my life rather than a foreground one. Present the way furniture is present, noticed mostly in its absence. He was already home when I got there. That was unusual. Marcus had not been home before 7:30 on a weekday in months. He was sitting at the kitchen table, not on the couch, not in front of the television, but at the table which we used for meals and paperwork and serious conversations. And the deliberateness of that choice registered before anything else did. There was a manila envelope on the table in front of him. He had loosened his tie. His hands were flat on the table on either side of the envelope like he was steadying something. He looked up when I walked in, and his face had the particular expression of a man who has rehearsed something and is now waiting for his cue. I set the grocery bag on the counter. I did not sit down. "I need to talk to you," he said. "Okay," I said. He talked for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I know because the clock on the microwave was directly in my line of sight. And I focused on it the way you focus on a fixed point when the ground is moving under you. He used the word connection 6 times. He used the phrase, "I haven't been happy," twice, both times in a way that made happiness sound like something that had been done to him rather than something he had failed to tend. He said Diane's name once near the end, like releasing pressure from a valve. Careful, controlled, just enough. He said he loved her. He said he was sorry. He slid the manila envelope across the table toward me. I looked at it. Petition for dissolution of marriage, Fulton County Superior Court. He had already signed his line. The date was 2 days ago, a Wednesday, which meant he had signed this on the same Wednesday. I had spent 6 hours reviewing Callaway Logistics wire transfers in a conference room on Peachtree Street, 3 miles from wherever he'd been sitting when he put pen to paper. I picked up the envelope. I looked at the document inside. I looked at his signature, the same signature I had watched him practice when we were 28 and just married, and he said he wanted it to look more like someone who knew what he was doing. Then I looked up at him. "Does she know you're doing this tonight?" I asked. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly, more like surprise that I had asked the wrong question. He had prepared for crying. He had prepared for anger, for accusations, for the kind of scene that would have confirmed a story he'd already written about us that I was too cold to. Interior, too locked inside my own head to meet him where he was. He had not prepared for a question about Diane's awareness of his scheduling. "What does that have to do with anything?" he said. "Nothing," I said. "I'm just asking." I set the envelope back on the table. I picked up the grocery bag. I put the salmon in the refrigerator, the wine on the counter, the lemon in the bowl, by the sink where we kept fruit. I did all of this with my back to him, and my hands were steady. And I was aware of my hands being steady, the way you're aware of your own breathing when you're trying to control it. "Victoria." His voice had shifted, the rehearsed version, gone now. Something rawer underneath. "Say something." I turned around. "I heard you," I said. "That's not—" He stopped, pressed his mouth together. "I thought you'd have more to say." "I probably will," I said. "Just not tonight." He slept in the guest room. I slept in our bed, and I did not stare at the ceiling the way people do in movies. I lay on my side, and I thought about the subledger discrepancy from that afternoon, because my brain has always moved toward problems it knows how to solve, and what was happening in my marriage was not by that point a problem I could solve. It was a conclusion. It had been moving toward this shape for months, and I had known it. And I had let it arrive on its own schedule, because forcing a conclusion before its time is how you end up with incomplete information. The next morning was Saturday. Marcus made coffee for both of us, out of habit or guilt, I wasn't sure which. I drank mine on the porch. He stood in the kitchen doorway and watched me through the glass, and I could see him working up to something and then deciding against it 3 separate times before he went back inside. Sunday he packed. He was efficient about it. 2 suitcases, a garment bag, his toiletries. He took his record collection and left the turntable, which told me the split had been negotiated in his head for longer than 4 minutes and 11 seconds at a kitchen table. He left his keys on the counter by the coffee maker. He said my name once from the doorway. I was washing a mug at the sink. I turned off the water. I turned around. "I hope you'll be okay," he said. There were so many true things I could have said in that moment. I knew about case hash ATL 2024-0093. I knew about 17 flagged transactions. I knew that 2 of the vendor contracts bearing his signature had already been flagged for subpoena. I knew that the woman he was driving toward suitcases in his car on a Sunday morning had a meeting with federal investigators scheduled, though she did not yet know it was scheduled within the next 60 days. I said none of those things. Because I'm a forensic accountant, and we do not testify before we are asked. And I was not asked. "I'll be fine, Marcus," I said. He nodded. He left. I turned the water back on. I finished washing the mug. Outside, his car reversed down the driveway with the particular sound of someone leaving a place for the last time. And I stood at the sink and listened to it fade. And I thought, he has no idea what he just walked into. I signed the divorce papers on a Tuesday. Marcus had expected it to take longer. I know this because his attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, whose office was in Sandy Springs, and whose voicemail message mentioned his own name 3 times, called my cell phone on a Thursday to follow up 6 days after Marcus left with the careful tone of someone prepared to navigate resistance. I told Gerald Fitch I had already signed and notarized and would be dropping the documents at the Fulton County Courthouse that afternoon. There was a pause on his end that lasted long enough to be meaningful. "That was fast," he said. "I read quickly," I said. I dropped the documents off at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday. The clerk stamped them without looking up. I walked back to my car through the parking lot and sat for a moment with the engine off and the windows up. And I allowed myself exactly that, a moment before I started the car and drove back to the office. People grieve in different directions. Some people go outward. They call everyone they need the story witnessed. They need the weight of it distributed across as many people as possible, so no single person has to hold too much. I go inward. I always have. My sister Renee called it going submarine, the way I would disappear beneath the surface of myself when things got hard. Still moving, still functional, just unreachable by ordinary means until I came back up. I went submarine. I told 4 people about the separation: Renee, my closest friend Patrice, my therapist Dr. Okonkwo, and Helen Park at work, because my work situation required it. I told each of them once with the same clean summary, and I did not elaborate beyond what was necessary. And I did not cry on any of those calls, which Renee said was worrying, and which Dr. Okonkwo said was something we should pay attention to, and which Patrice said was, "Very you, Victoria, very you." What none of them knew, what I could not tell any of them, was that the not crying was not suppression. It was orientation. I was not swallowing something down. I was already facing forward toward the only thing that had ever reliably made sense to me, the work. 3 days after Marcus left, Helen formally assigned me as lead forensic reviewer on case hash ATL 2024-0093. I want to be precise about the ethics of this, because I have been precise about it with myself many times since. I disclosed to Helen that my now estranged husband had been employed at Callaway Logistics. I disclosed this the same morning Marcus left, before the ink on any paperwork was anywhere near dry, in a 7-minute conversation in Helen's office, with the door closed. Helen consulted with the firm's ethics counsel. The determination was that my assignment to the case could continue, provided I documented the disclosure, recused myself from any findings that directly implicated Marcus specifically, and had my work independently reviewed by a second senior accountant on any subsection touching Callaway's sales division. I agreed to all of it. I signed the disclosure form. I kept my name on the case. Some people would have stepped away. I understand that choice. But stepping away would have required me to believe that my personal circumstances had compromised my professional judgment. And I had 9 years of documented work that said otherwise. And Helen had 6 years of watching me operate that said otherwise. And I was not willing to make myself smaller than I was, in a season when the world was already asking me to make myself smaller. So I stayed. And I worked. The shape of the case was becoming clearer by October. Callaway Logistics had been operating a billing fraud scheme for approximately 4 years, inflating freight contract values, routing the overages through shell vendors, and pulling the excess back into accounts connected to Diane Callaway through a layered structure that was sophisticated enough to avoid casual detection, but not sophisticated enough to avoid me. The shell vendors had names that sounded real Atlas distribution partners. Southeast Freight Consultants, LLC, Cardinal Supply Chain Solutions. Each one had a clean website, a registered agent, a business license, and nothing else. No employees, no office, no operational history beyond the paper. The money moved in patterns. Patterns are what I hear. I worked late on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I kept my desk exactly as it always had been. I ate the same lunch, a turkey sandwich from the deli on the ground floor, a clementine water. And I answered emails promptly and attended the weekly team meeting, and nothing about my exterior suggested that anything had shifted beneath it. Marcus, meanwhile, had moved into Diane's house in Buckhead. I knew this not because I was tracking him, but because Patrice saw his car there twice, and mentioned it the way you mention something you're not sure whether to mention, watching my face carefully as she said it. I told her it was fine. She said, "You keep saying that." I said, "Because it keeps being true." She didn't look entirely convinced, but she let it go. He posted a photo in mid-October. Instagram, which I did not check, but which Renee screenshotted and sent me at 9:14 p.m. on a Wednesday, with no caption, just the image. Marcus and Diane at what appeared to be a restaurant in Inman Park, candlelight, wine glasses, her hand on the table near his. She was wearing a black dress and a particular expression that I recognized from the few work events I'd attended, where she was present, the expression of a woman who knows exactly who is watching and has curated this moment accordingly. He looked happy, or he looked like someone performing happiness for an audience, and I was no longer certain he knew the difference. I closed the screenshot. I set my phone face down on my nightstand. I picked up the Callaway case file I'd brought home, and a habit Helen frowned upon but allowed, and I found the page I'd flagged earlier that week. It was a wire transfer authorization. October 14th, 3 years prior. $387,000 to Southeast Freight Consultants, LLC for Q4 Logistics Consulting Services. The authorization had 2 signatures, Diane Callaway's and one other, Marcus Jerome Ellison, VP of Sales. I looked at his signature for a long time. The same signature he'd practiced at 28. The one that was supposed to look like someone who knew what he was doing. I clipped a yellow flag to the page. I wrote the date and my initials in the margin. I set the file on my nightstand next to my phone, and I turned out the light. Outside, Atlanta was doing what Atlanta does on October nights, warm. Still the city glittering, people moving through it like they had all the time in the world. Inside, I lay in the dark and listened to the particular silence of a house that has stopped pretending. And I thought 60 days. Maybe less. The party was Diane's idea. I heard about it from Patrice, who heard about it from a woman named Keisha, who worked in Callaway Logistics' HR department and had not yet decided whether loyalty to her employer or self-preservation was the smarter position to hold. According to Keisha, Diane had rented the rooftop at a hotel in Midtown, the kind of venue that required a deposit larger than most people's monthly rent, and had invited 60 people for what the invitation described as an intimate celebration of new beginnings. The date was a Saturday in early November, 6 weeks after Marcus left. I was not invited. I want to be clear that I did not expect to be and did not want to be. What I want to be clear about is that I knew about it, and I knew the guest list included several of Marcus's former colleagues from Callaway, who had apparently made their social allegiances quickly. And I knew that Diane had described the evening to at least 3 people who told other people, who eventually told Patrice as introducing Marcus properly, as though what she was doing was a correction of something that had been done wrong before. Renee called me that Saturday evening around 8. She was somewhere loud. I could hear music, laughter, the specific acoustics of a house party in full swing. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Working," I said. "Victoria." "I'm fine, Renee." "It's Saturday night and you're working and he's at a party with her." "I'm aware of where he is," I said. "I'm also aware of where I am, and where I am is exactly where I need to be." She was quiet for a moment. "Then you're the strangest person I love." "I know," I said. "Tell me about your party." She told me about her party. I half listened and kept my eyes on the document in front of me. A 3-year-old vendor contract between Callaway Logistics and Atlas Distribution Partners, $612,000, authorized by Diane Callaway, and co-signed by the VP of Operations at the time. Marcus hadn't been VP yet when this one was signed. That mattered. That was the kind of detail that determined the difference between a witness and a subject. And I was building that distinction carefully, brick by brick, the way you build anything that has to hold weight. The party apparently went well. There were photos. On Sunday morning, Marcus called my mother. This was the thing that cracked something open in me that the divorce papers hadn't, that the packed suitcases hadn't, that the Instagram photo hadn't. Not because he called her Marcus, and my mother had always had a functional warmth, the careful cordiality of people who love the same person differently, but because of what he said. My mother called me at 10:47 a.m. She was using her careful voice, the one she deployed when she had information she wasn't sure how to deliver. She said Marcus had called to explain the situation. She said he had told her that I had been emotionally unavailable for years, that I was too consumed by work to be a real partner, that he had tried everything before making the decision to leave. I sat with that for a moment. "What did you say?" I asked her. "I said I appreciated him calling," she said, "and that I'd be calling you next." "What do you actually think?" I asked. A pause. My mother has never been a woman who rushes her words. "I think," she said slowly, "that a man who leaves doesn't usually call his wife's mother the next day unless he's trying to build a case." "Yes," I said. "That's what I think too." After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee going cold. and I felt something I had been carefully managing not to feel for 6 weeks. Not sadness exactly, and not anger exactly, but something that lived between them. The low, pressurized feeling in my chest, like weather changing. He had come into my mother's house through the phone and rearranged the furniture. He had taken his narrative, the one where he was a man, driven away by a cold, work-obsessed wife, and planted it in the one place I couldn't easily follow to correct it. I gave myself 20 minutes with that feeling. I have learned in therapy and in life that feelings not given any space will find their own space, usually at inconvenient times. And 20 minutes of intentional sitting with something difficult is more efficient than 6 weeks of accidentally sitting with it while pretending you're not. At minute 21, I got up, rinsed my coffee mug, and opened my laptop. I had received an email at 6:43 a.m. before the party photos, before Marcus's call to my mother from the FBI field office coordinator on the Callaway case. It was a scheduling email, dry and bureaucratic, the kind that doesn't announce its own significance. A grand jury date had been set. The formal subpoena package for Callaway Logistics financial records would be served within the next 30 days. My reviewed findings, all 14 volumes of them, were to be submitted to the Assistant U.S. Attorney's Office by the 15th of the following month. I read the email twice. Then I opened the case file and started checking my work from the beginning. Because that is what you do when something you have been building for months is about to be handed to people whose job is to find the flaws in it. And I had not survived 6 years in this profession by assuming my first pass was my best pass. It was in that second review that I found the thing I had missed. Not missed noted, but not yet fully mapped. In November of the previous year, 4 months before Marcus was promoted to VP, Diane had added him as an authorized signatory on Callaway's primary operating account. Not the vendor payment account, the operating account, the one that received the inflated contract payments before they were distributed. His authorization predated his VP title by 4 months, which meant the promotion had been, at least in part, a retroactive legitimization of access he'd already been given. He had been chosen before he knew he was being chosen. I thought about the way he'd said it that October night 14 months ago, still in his coat face rearranged. She chose me. I thought about Diane at that restaurant in Inman Park, her hand near his on the table, that curated expression, the rooftop party, the call to my mother, the careful, continuous construction of a story in which Marcus Ellison was a man ascending a man, finally seen a man who had made the right choice. I thought about the $387,000 wire transfer with his signature at the bottom. I flagged the new finding. I documented it with the date and time, and a reference to the original note I'd made in October. I cross-referenced it to 3 other documents in the file. I wrote a clean summary paragraph and saved it to the secure server. Then I closed my laptop, changed into my running shoes, and went outside. Atlanta on a November Sunday is a specific kind of beautiful. The light lower and more golden, the air finally carrying something cool, the city moving at a slower pace, like it's remembering how to breathe. I ran 4 miles through Decatur, and I didn't listen to anything, just my feet on the pavement and the sound of leaves and the particular feeling of a body doing exactly what it was built to do. When I got home, I showered and made dinner and called Patrice and listened to her describe a date she'd been on. And I laughed in the right places. And I felt for the first time in 6 weeks something close to level. The subpoena would be served in 30 days. Diane Callaway was hosting rooftop parties and introducing Marcus properly and calling her company's future full of possibility, in an interview she gave to an Atlanta business publication that same week. The publication ran the piece on a Wednesday. The grand jury met on a Thursday. Nobody told Diane. The subpoena was served on a Wednesday morning in December. I was not there when it happened. I was at my desk on the 14th floor of the Reeves and Carmichael building, reviewing my submitted findings for the 3rd time, a habit Helen called excessive, and I called professional when the field office coordinator sent a 2-line email at 9:17 a.m. confirming service had been completed. Callaway Logistics' registered agent had accepted the documents at 8:54 a.m. All financial records for the preceding 5 years were now under legal hold. I read the email. I noted the time in my case log. I went back to my findings. This is the part of the story where people expect me to feel something dramatic, satisfaction, vindication, the particular electricity of watching a long-built structure finally make contact with the ground. What I felt was more like the quiet after a calculation resolves. The kind of stillness that isn't empty, but settled. The answer had always been there in the numbers. Now, other people were going to see it too. Diane Callaway did not know about the subpoena for approximately 4 hours. I know this because the field office coordinator told me later that Callaway Logistics' in-house counsel, a man named Preston Webb, who had been with the company for 3 years and whose own exposure in this matter was not yet fully determined, did not reach Diane by phone until shortly after 1 p.m. She had been in back-to-back meetings all morning. Her assistant had taken the subpoena package from the registered agent, logged it as incoming legal correspondence, and placed it in the stack on Preston Webb's desk without flagging it as urgent, because she did not know what a federal subpoena looked like and had never seen one before. By the time Diane read the documents, the financial records were already being imaged by the FBI's forensic technology team, who had arrived at the Callaway server room with a separate warrant at 10:30 a.m. I learned these details in sequence over the following days, the way you learn the specifics of something significant, not all at once, but in pieces that gradually assemble themselves into a complete picture. What I knew in real time on that Wednesday was the case number, the service confirmation, and the fact that my 14 volumes of findings were now in the hands of Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Ngozi, who had a reputation in the Atlanta legal community for being methodical, unhurried, and correct. What I did not know on that Wednesday was what Marcus knew. I found out on Thursday. He called my cell phone at 7:48 p.m. I was in my kitchen making rice, and I looked at his name on the screen for 2 full rings before I answered. We had not spoken since he left. There had been communication through attorneys, the divorce proceedings, the joint account closure, the question of the car we'd bought together, but not his voice. Not directly, not in 3 months. "Victoria," he said. His voice was different. Not broken. Marcus was not a man who broke easily, or at least not audibly, but compressed like something large was being held at significant pressure inside a smaller space than it required. "Marcus," I said. "Did you hear?" he said. "Hear what?" I said, which was not a lie. I wanted to know what he knew and how he knew it, and what version of the story he was currently holding. "Diane's company," he said. "They got served with something. A federal subpoena. Her lawyer called me today. There's some kind of investigation, they're saying." He stopped. I heard him exhale slowly. "They're saying it goes back 4 years. I stirred the rice. "That sounds serious," I said. "Victoria." A pause. "I sign things. She asked me to sign things, and I signed them because she said it was standard, and I trusted her, and I..." Another pause longer, this time the kind that means the person on the other end is recalculating in real time. "I need to know if I should be worried." I set down the spoon. This was the moment I had not rehearsed. Not because I hadn't anticipated it. I had in the abstract understood that this conversation would eventually happen, but because I had not let myself imagine the specific texture of it, the way his voice would sound when the ground shifted under him, the way he would call me of all people, because even after everything, I was still the person he trusted to tell him the truth about numbers. "I can't talk to you about this, Marcus," I said. Silence. "What do you mean you can't?" "I mean I can't talk to you about this," I said. You should call your own attorney, not Gerald Fitch, someone with federal experience. Tonight, if possible. Another silence. Longer. Victoria, do you know something? Call an attorney, I said. That's all I can tell you. I heard him breathe. Once, twice, then, is it bad? I picked up the spoon. I checked the rice. Call an attorney, Marcus, I said. Good night. I hung up. I stood at the stove for a moment with the phone in my hand, and the rice bubbling quietly in the pot, and the kitchen smelling like garlic, and something warm. And I thought about the first time Marcus had cooked for me a disastrous attempt at pasta in his studio apartment in Midtown 11 years ago, water boiling over smoke alarm, going off both of us laughing until we couldn't stand up. I thought about how certain he had been, even then, that things would work out, that the universe was broadly arranged in his favor. That confidence and forward motion were sufficient protection against most outcomes. I thought about case hash ATL 2024-0093. I thought about $387,000, and a signature that was supposed to look like someone who knew what he was doing. Then I served myself dinner and sat at the table alone and ate it while it was still warm. The full picture of what I had built over 4 months looked like this. Callaway Logistics had fraudulently billed $4.3 million across 11 vendor contracts over 4 years. The money had moved through 3 shell companies, Atlas Distribution Partners, Southeast Freight Consultants LLC, and Cardinal Supply Chain Solutions, before being consolidated into 2 accounts, one held by a Callaway family trust in Delaware, and one held by a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands under a name that required 7 documents to trace back to Diane Callaway personally. The scheme had required internal authorization at multiple levels to appear legitimate. Diane had managed this by rotating co-signatories using different people for different contracts, spreading the signatures thin enough that no single employee held enough of the picture to understand what they were part of. Marcus had signed 6 of the 11 contracts. Total value of contracts, he'd authorized $2.1 million. His signatures appeared on documents spanning 14 months, beginning 4 months before his official promotion and ending 2 months before the company received its first informal inquiry from a federal contractor oversight office, an inquiry that had apparently prompted Diane to stop using internal co-signatories and shift to a different authorization method. She had used him while the risk was manageable, then stopped when it wasn't. I had documented all of this. I had cross-referenced every signature against his employment records, his promotion date, his authorization level at each point in time. I had noted in clear language in Volume 9 of my findings that the pattern of his co-signatures was consistent with an employee acting in good faith on instruction from a superior, rather than with independent knowledge of fraudulent intent. I had noted it because it was true and because my job is to document what the evidence shows, not what would be satisfying. The distinction between a witness and a subject in a federal fraud case is thin and technical and depends entirely on what you can demonstrate about knowledge and intent. Marcus had signed things he didn't understand because a woman he trusted had handed them to him and called it standard practice, and he had wanted so badly to be the kind of man she believed he was that he had not asked the questions a more careful person would have asked. He had chosen access over accuracy. That was not a crime. It was something else, a failure of a different kind, more personal than legal, the kind that doesn't show up in a case file but lives in the space between who you are and who you've been performing. I finished my dinner. I washed the dish. I went to my desk and opened my laptop and began preparing the executive summary of my findings that AUSA Patricia Ngozi had requested for the following Monday. I wrote for 2 hours, cleanly, precisely, without editorializing. At the top of the summary, under the case number and the date, I wrote a single sentence that I'd been composing in my head in various forms for 4 months. The evidence indicates a deliberate and sustained pattern of financial fraud orchestrated by Diane Calloway, with internal co-signatories used instrumentally and without full disclosure of the scheme's nature or purpose. I read it back. I changed one word. I read it again. Then I saved the document, encrypted it, and sent it to the secure server at 11:03 p.m. Outside Atlanta was quiet the way it gets in December, the holiday lights on Peachtree Street visible from my window, the city doing its best impression of peace. Somewhere across town, in a house in Buckhead. I imagined Marcus sitting with his phone and his compressed voice, and the first real understanding that the ground beneath him had always been someone else's ground, and he had been standing on it by permission, and the permission had been quietly revoked. I turned off my desk lamp. I went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. The arrest happened on a Tuesday, not a dramatic Tuesday, not a Tuesday that announced itself. A Tuesday in late January that began the way Tuesdays in Atlanta begin, in winter gray sky cold that felt personal, the city moving through its morning routines with its collar turned up and its head down. I had a 7 a.m. call with the AUSA's office to finalize 2 clarifications in my executive summary. I was at my desk by 6:45, with coffee and the relevant pages open in front of me, the building mostly empty, the cleaning crew finishing the last of the overnight work somewhere down the hall. The call lasted 31 minutes. Patricia Ngozi asked 4 questions. I answered them directly with references to specific page numbers in my findings. She thanked me in the way she thanked everyone briefly, precisely, without warmth or coldness. Just the clean, professional acknowledgement of work received. Before she ended the call, she said, "We'll be moving forward this week." She did not say more than that. I did not ask. I knew what this week meant. I went back to a different case file, a routine audit for a construction company in Gwinnett County. And I worked through the morning. Helen brought me a coffee refill at 9:30 and set it on my desk without interrupting me, which is one of the reasons I have stayed at Reeves and Carmichael for 6 years. At 10:12 a.m., my cell phone rang. Marcus. I looked at the screen. I let it ring once, twice. I thought about Patricia Ngozi saying this week. I thought about the fact that Marcus calling me meant something had already happened, or was happening, or was close enough to happening, that he had picked up his phone before he had time to think about who he was calling. I answered on the 3rd ring. Victoria. His voice was different from the December call. The compression was gone. What replaced it was something I had no clinical word for, a kind of acoustic nakedness, like a frequency stripped of its insulation. "They're here." "Where are you?" I said. "At the office. Diane's office. I was in a meeting with her and Preston and 2 other people, and they just..." A sound in the background. Voices, a door. "There are 4 of them. They have badges. They asked everyone to step out, and they took Diane into the conference room, and they're..." He stopped. I heard in the background the specific quality of silence that descends on an office floor when something unprecedented is happening, not quiet exactly, but a held breath quality, 30 or 40 people suddenly aware that the ordinary rules of the day have been suspended. "Marcus," I said, "listen to me. Don't say anything to anyone. Not to Preston, not to your colleagues, not to anyone in that building. Call your attorney, the federal one, not Gerald, and don't speak until he's on the phone with you. Do you understand?" "Victoria, did you know this was going to happen today?" I was quiet for a moment. "Call your attorney," I said. "Right now, before you say anything else to me or to anyone." "Did you know?" he said again. His voice had changed again, the nakedness sharpening into something more focused, more specific. Not quite accusation. Something adjacent to it, the emotional equivalent of a hand reaching toward a wall to find out if it's solid. I knew an investigation was underway, I said. I told you that in December. I told you to get an attorney. You knew more than that. It was not a question. I let the silence sit for a moment. Outside my office window, Midtown Atlanta was doing its ordinary Tuesday things traffic on West Peachtree. A delivery truck double-parked a woman in a red coat, walking fast with her phone to her ear. The city entirely unaware that 6 miles away in a glass-fronted office building in Buckhead, 4 federal agents were sitting across a conference table from Diane Calloway. "Call your attorney, Marcus," I said. "That's what I can tell you." I heard him exhale. Long, slow, the exhale of a man releasing something he'd been holding without knowing he was holding it. Then quietly, almost to himself, "She used me." I didn't answer that. Not because it wasn't true, because it was entirely true, and he already knew it. And there was nothing I could add to that knowledge that would make it more or less true. And sometimes the most honest thing you can do is let a person sit with their own correct conclusion without rushing in to confirm or soften it. "Call your attorney," I said one more time. "I mean it." "Okay," he said. He hung up. I set my phone face down on my desk. I picked up my coffee. I looked at the Gwinnett County audit file, and I did not see it for approximately 45 seconds, not because I was emotional, but because my brain was doing what it does when a long-running calculation finally closes, running back through the sequence one more time to confirm the arithmetic. 4 years of fraud, 11 contracts, $4.3 million, 3 shell companies, 1 grand jury, 1 arrest warrant signed by a federal magistrate judge whose name I'd seen at the bottom of the search warrant application 2 weeks earlier, and Diane Calloway in a conference room in Buckhead, finally in a room she had not curated and could not rearrange around herself. I went back to the Gwinnett County file. At 11:30 a.m., Helen appeared in my doorway. She was holding her own coffee, and her expression was the careful neutral she wore when she had information and was assessing how to deliver it. "You've seen the news," she said. "Not yet," I said. She nodded slowly. "Diane Calloway was taken into federal custody this morning. It's on the AJC website. They're calling it a multi-year fraud scheme." She paused. "They mentioned the case number." "Okay," I said. Helen studied me for a moment. "You all right?" "I'm fine," I said. "Victoria." "Helen, I'm fine." I held her gaze. "It's a good day for accurate work." She almost smiled. Almost. Then she nodded once and went back to her office. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran the story at 11:47 a.m. By noon, it had been picked up by 2 local television stations. By 1 p.m., it was on the AP Wire. The headline on the AJC piece was clean and declarative in the way that federal arrest stories tend to be. Atlanta Logistics CEO Diane Calloway, arrested on federal fraud charges, scheme totaling $4.30 million alleged. The third paragraph mentioned that Calloway Logistics' financial records had been under subpoena since December, and that forensic accounting analysis had been central to the case. It did not mention my name. I had not expected it to, and did not want it to. The 6th paragraph mentioned that federal investigators were also examining the roles of several company executives who had authorized fraudulent vendor contracts. It did not name anyone specifically. It did not need to. I know because Patrice texted me the link at 1:23 p.m. with 3 question marks and no other context. I texted back, "I'll explain later." She replied, "Victoria." I put my phone in my desk drawer and went back to work. The afternoon was ordinary in the way that afternoons sometimes are. After extraordinary mornings, the fluorescent lights, the same the keyboard, the same the particular sound of the buildings settling around 3 p.m., the same as always. I finished the Gwinnett County preliminary review. I responded to 2 emails. I attended a 4 o'clock internal meeting about a new federal contract the firm was pursuing, and I contributed twice and took notes. At 5:47 p.m., I shut down my computer, put on my coat, and took the elevator down to the parking garage. I sat in my car for a moment before starting it. The parking garage was quiet. A few other cars, the distant sound of the elevator fluorescent lights humming at their single indifferent pitch. I thought about the morning 11 years ago when Marcus had walked across a room toward me while it was raining outside and said, "You look like you're solving something." I thought about 9 years. I thought about Sunday mornings and a turntable he'd left behind, and a savings account split in two on a Wednesday evening while I was in the middle of something else. I thought about Diane Calloway, choosing him not for what he was, but for what she needed him to be, and for how long she needed him, and for how convenient it was when she no longer did. I thought about his voice on the phone that morning. She used me. The correct conclusion arrived at in real time in the worst possible setting. I started the car. I drove home through Tuesday evening Atlanta, through traffic on I-285 and surface streets in Decatur and the specific orange of winter streetlights on wet pavement, and I felt something move through me that I didn't try to name. Not triumph, not grief, not the vindication I had been warned by Dr. Okonkwo. Not to expect to feel the way I imagined I would feel. Something quieter than all of those. Something that felt more than anything else like accuracy. Things had been what they were. Now everyone knew what they were. That was enough. That was in the end exactly enough. I pulled into my parking spot. I turned off the engine. I sat in the dark for one more moment, and then I picked up my bag and went inside. The first domino was the company. Calloway Logistics went into operational suspension within 72 hours of Diane's arrest. I did not learn this from the news. I learned it from the case file update that landed in my secure inbox at 6:14 a.m. on a Friday 3 days after the Tuesday arrest. A 2-paragraph summary from the AUSA's office, noting that the company's primary operating accounts had been frozen by court order, and that all vendor contracts were under immediate review pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. $4.3 million frozen, 11 contracts suspended, 47 employees arriving at work on a Wednesday morning to find a notice on the door and a number to call. I read the update. I noted it in my case log. I made coffee. The second domino was Preston Webb. Calloway's in-house counsel had spent the 2 weeks between the subpoena and the arrest, doing what lawyers do when they sense the structure collapsing quietly, repositioning himself. He had retained his own criminal defense attorney 9 days before Diane was taken into custody. He had, according to information that reached me through the appropriate legal channels, already made preliminary contact with the AUSA's office about the possibility of a cooperation agreement. Preston Webb was going to talk. This mattered because Preston Webb had been present at meetings I had only been able to reconstruct from documents. He had context for decisions that the paper trail implied but could not fully confirm. His cooperation would close gaps in the narrative that my 14 volumes of findings had left deliberately open places where the evidence pointed strongly but stopped short of the kind of direct testimony that federal prosecutors prefer to have before they stand in front of a jury. I was not told the specifics of what Preston said. I was not entitled to that information in my role. What I was told by the field office coordinator in a brief call on a Thursday was that my findings had been described by the prosecution team as the structural backbone of the case. That phrase, structural backbone. I wrote it in my notebook, not because I needed to remember it, but because I wanted to see what it looked like written down. The third domino was Marcus. He called on a Saturday. 2 weeks after the arrest, 3 weeks after the Tuesday, he had stood in Diane's office listening to the sound of federal badges being presented. He called at 10:23 a.m., which meant he had waited until a reasonable hour, which meant this call had been thought about and possibly rehearsed which was different from the 7:48 p.m. call in December and the Tuesday morning call from Buckhead. I answered. "I got an attorney," he said. "Federal. His name is David Park." "Good," I said. He said I'm a witness, not a subject. He said the prosecution has already indicated they don't believe I had knowledge of the fraudulent nature of the contracts I signed. "That's consistent with what the evidence shows," I said carefully. A pause, long enough that I could hear him deciding something. "Was that your assessment?" he said. "In your findings, did you—" He stopped, started again. "Did you document that?" I thought about Volume 9, the paragraph I had written about pattern of co-signatures consistent with an employee acting in good faith on instruction from a superior. The language I had chosen carefully that I had read back twice and changed one word and read again before I saved it. "I documented what the evidence showed," I said. "That's my job." Another pause. "Victoria." His voice had lost the compressed quality and the naked quality both. What was left was something I hadn't heard from him in a long time. Something unguarded, without performance or agenda. Just a man sitting somewhere saying a name he didn't know what else to do with. I don't know how to... "Marcus, I need to say something." "You don't," I said, not unkindly. "You really don't." "I was wrong," he said anyway. "About a lot of things. About you. About what I thought I wanted. About what I thought she was." A pause. "She was using me from the beginning. David thinks she targeted me specifically, that she promoted me because I was trustworthy enough to sign things without asking too many questions and not senior enough to understand what I was signing. I was quiet. She chose me," he said. And this time, those two words held a completely different weight than they had 14 months ago in the kitchen doorway, still in his coat. Face rearranged with something that looked like a rival. This time, they were not pride. They were the sound of a man understanding fully and without softening what being chosen by someone like Diane Calloway had actually meant. "Yes," I said. "She did. And I left you for it." I didn't answer that. I stood at my kitchen window and looked at the backyard, the winter grass, the bare crepe myrtle I'd been meaning to trim since October. The specific gray of a Georgia January that manages to be bleak and still beautiful if you look at it without wanting it to be something else. "I'm not going to tell you it's okay," I said finally, "because it's not okay. But it's done, and I think you need to focus on what's in front of you right now, which is getting through this legal process intact." "David says it should resolve in 6 to 8 months, Marcus said. "As a witness, testimony probably. Then it's over." "Then focus on that," I said. "And after that," he said. I knew what he was asking. I chose to answer only the part I could answer honestly. "After that, you rebuild," I said. "That's what you do." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you doing okay?" he asked. Actually, not the Victoria version of okay. Despite everything, despite the 9 months since October, when the Ksaivat appeared in his coat pocket, despite the manila envelope on the kitchen table and the keys left by the coffee maker, and my mother's careful voice on a Sunday morning, despite all of it, the question made something shift briefly in my chest. The genuine version of that question. The one that remembered who I was to him before everything else. "I'm doing well, actually," I said. "The Victoria version and the regular version are the same right now." He made a sound that might have been a short, quiet laugh. The kind that isn't about anything being funny. "Good," he said. "That's good." We hung up without ceremony. No closure statement, no tidy summation. Just two people ending a phone call the way you end a phone call when you've said what needed saying, and there's nothing left to perform. I stood at the window a moment longer. Then the fourth domino fell, and it was the loudest one. On a Monday morning, 3 weeks after the arrest, Diane Calloway's personal assets were frozen by civil forfeiture order. The house in Buckhead, the one Marcus had moved into in October, the one with the curated entry and the rooftop party venue rented for 60 people, was listed among the properties under the order. The order covered real property investment accounts, 2 vehicles registered in Diane's name, and contents of a trust account in Delaware that my findings had traced through 4 layers of shell documentation. Marcus had 48 hours to remove his personal belongings before the property was formally inventoried. He moved into a month-to-month apartment in East Atlanta. Patrice heard this from Keisha, who heard it from someone still navigating the wreckage of Callaway Logistics' HR department. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on Glenwood Avenue. No rooftop, no Buckhead zip code, no woman who chose him for reasons that were never about him. Just a man in a modest apartment in East Atlanta, starting over with a federal witness summons in his kitchen drawer and a signed cooperation agreement, and the very slow, very unglamorous process of understanding who he actually was when no one was performing anything. The 5th domino was smaller, but felt significant to me in a way I didn't try to explain to anyone. In early February, 3 weeks after Marcus moved out, Diane Calloway's attorney filed a motion to have the personal property inside the Buckhead house returned to her client pending trial. Among the items listed in the motion as Diane's personal property, a Cartier watch, 3 pieces of original art, a set of monogrammed luggage, and a ring. Described in the legal filing as 1 platinum band with paved diamond setting, purchased approximately 14 months prior. I read that line twice, not because it surprised me, because I knew exactly when that ring had been purchased. I knew because the joint account we'd closed in September, the one Marcus had suggested splitting into separate accounts for financial independence 8 months before he left, had one final transaction I'd never examined closely because it happened after we'd agreed to close it, and I had assumed it was a routine charge. $4.200. Unnamed jeweler. Buckhead location. I had signed off on the account closure without questioning it. A detail I had let go because I was in the middle of a complicated audit and didn't have the bandwidth. He had bought it before he left, before the kitchen table, before the manila envelope, before the keys on the counter. He had bought it and put it on her hand and walked out of our house on a Sunday morning with 2 suitcases and left the turntable behind. And now, it was listed in a federal legal filing as property of a woman in federal custody, and a judge would decide what happened to it, and none of that had anything to do with me anymore. I set down the filing. I picked up my coffee. I went back to work. The trial date was set for September, 8 months after the arrest, 14 months after Marcus packed his bag on a Sunday, 26 months after Diane Calloway had stood in a doorway and told a room full of people that her company was built on trust, and that trust was the only currency that mattered in business. A statement I had read in a profile of her in Atlanta magazine. While sitting in a waiting room somewhere before I knew her name, in any professional capacity before any of this had a shape. I know the trial date because Patricia Ngozi's office sent a formal notification to all expert witnesses and forensic reviewers in early February. I was scheduled to testify on day 4. My testimony would cover the financial findings, the methodology, the conclusions, the documentation chain. I had testified in federal cases twice before. I knew what it required, and I had already begun preparing. But this is not the story of the trial. The trial was procedure. What happened in the months before, it was everything else. In March, Callaway Logistics was officially dissolved. The 47 employees who had arrived at work to find a notice on the door received a formal letter from the bankruptcy trustee confirming that the company had no assets available for severance payments. Their health insurance ended on the last day of the month. Their 401k accounts, those that had company-matched contributions, were under separate review as part of the asset forfeiture proceedings, which meant the money was technically there, but practically inaccessible for an indeterminate period. I learned this from a piece in the AJC that ran on a Thursday. I read it at my desk during lunch. I thought about 47 people and their ordinary Tuesday mornings, and the specific helplessness of arriving somewhere expecting the day to be one thing, and finding it is another thing, entirely a more permanent thing, a thing that reorganizes what comes next, whether you are ready or not. I understood that feeling, not the same way they understood it, but I understood the architecture of it. In April, Preston Webb signed his formal cooperation agreement with the government. I was informed of this through the appropriate channels, a brief notification that my findings had been formally incorporated into the prosecution's case in chief, and that Preston Webb's testimony was expected to corroborate the financial picture my work had established. The AUSA's office sent a supplemental question list asking me to clarify 3 specific points in Volume 7 relating to the timing of authorization changes on the primary operating account. I answered the questions in a 12-page addendum that I submitted within 48 hours. Helen read it before it went out. She sat across from my desk with the pages in her hand and read in silence for 11 minutes. Then she looked up and said, "This is the best work I've seen from you, and I've seen good work from you for 6 years." I thanked her. "How are you doing with all of it?" she said. "Not as my supervisor, as something closer." "I'm good," I said. "Victoria." "Helen, I'm actually good." I held her gaze. "I think that's what's strange about it. I expected it to feel different, more complicated. But it mostly just feels like work that needed doing got done." She studied me for a moment. "Dr. Okonkwo still in the picture?" "Every other Thursday," I said. She nodded. "Good." She set the addendum on my desk. "Send it." In May, Marcus testified before the grand jury. I knew the date because his attorney, David Park, had notified the AUSA's office, and the notification had come through the case communication chain that I was still formally attached to as a forensic reviewer. I was not in the building when he testified. I was at my desk working on a different case, a pension fund audit for a county government in Middle Georgia that had nothing to do with anyone I knew. I did not think about Marcus testifying specifically. I thought about the general category of it, a man sitting in a federal grand jury room telling the truth about things he had signed without understanding, accounting for a year of choices that had seemed like assent and turned out to be something else entirely. I thought about whether he was good at that, telling the truth plainly without performing it. I thought he probably was, if he'd stopped trying to manage how it landed. He called that evening at 7:15. "It's done," he said. "How did it go?" I said. "It went." A pause. "David said I did well. They asked me about every contract, every meeting where she gave me things to sign, every time she told me it was standard." Another pause. "It was a long day." "I imagine," I said. "They asked about you," he said. I was quiet. "About my marriage. About what you did for work. Whether I knew about the investigation through you." He said it cleanly without accusation, just reporting. "I told them I didn't. That you had disclosed appropriately to your firm, and that you'd told me to get an attorney, and that was the extent of it." "That's accurate," I said. "I know," he said. "That's why I said it." We were quiet for a moment. The easy kind of quiet which surprised me. The kind that doesn't require filling. "Victoria," he said, "I want you to know something." He paused, gathering it. "When they asked about you, about who you were, what you were like, I told them you were the most rigorous person I'd ever known. That you didn't cut corners on anything. That if you said something was true, it was true." I didn't say anything. "I meant it," he said. "I should have led with that 11 years ago, instead of ending with it." "Marcus," I said gently. I know, he said. I know. I'm not. He stopped. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know. Okay, I said. I know. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a while, without doing anything in particular. The evening was warm, in the way Atlanta evenings get in. May, the windows open, the sound of the neighborhood coming in, someone's music 2 doors down, the smell of someone grilling the particular quality of spring light going amber at the edges before it gives up entirely. I thought about 11 years. Not with grief exactly. More the way you think about a piece of work you've completed, what it required, what it taught you, what you would do differently, what you would keep exactly as it was. In June, Diane Calloway's motion to reduce bail was denied. She had been out on a $500,000 bond since February. Surrendered passport ankle monitor required to remain in Fulton County. Her attorney had filed a motion arguing that the restrictions were excessive given her community ties and the white-collar nature of the charges. The judge denied it in 2 paragraphs that were by federal judicial standards unusually direct. In July, 3 of the 11 defrauded vendors companies that had legitimately bid on contracts that were then awarded to Diane's shell companies filed a civil suit against the Calloway estate for damages totaling $1.8 million. In August, Diane Calloway's attorney filed a plea negotiation request. It took 3 weeks. The terms were not public, but the outcome was Diane pleaded guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of money laundering in a proceeding that lasted 40 minutes on a Wednesday morning. Sentencing was scheduled for November. Federal sentencing guidelines for fraud of this scale and duration suggested a range of 63 to 78 months. The trial, therefore, did not happen. My testimony was not needed. I received the notification on a Thursday at 4:47 p.m. A brief email from Patricia Ngozi's office, thanking me for my work on the case and confirming that my role as forensic reviewer was formally concluded. 3 sentences. Clean, precise, without warmth or coldness. I sat with that for a moment. 4 months of work, 14 volumes, a structural backbone. And it ended with a 3-sentence email on a Thursday afternoon while I was still in the office and Helen was in a meeting down the hall, and the fluorescent lights hummed their single indifferent note. I typed a 2-sentence reply thanking the AUSA's office for the opportunity to contribute. I read it back. I sent it. Then I picked up my phone and called Patrice. "It's over," I said when she answered. A pause. Then, "Diane." "She pleaded guilty," I said. "Wednesday morning." A longer pause. The kind that means someone is recalibrating. "Victoria." Her voice had shifted into something softer, something that had been waiting under the surface of every careful conversation we'd had for months. "How do you feel?" I looked out my office window. Midtown Atlanta in late August, the sun going sideways the city. Doing what it does in the hour before evening. Everything slightly gold, slightly unhurried, the traffic audible but distant, the world proceeding at its ordinary pace, without reference to the things that had mattered so much inside it. "I feel like it's over," I said. "That's not the same as how you feel," Patrice said. "No," I agreed. "It's not." So, I thought about the cravat in the coat pocket, the Altoids tin, the phone face down on the coffee table, the manila envelope sliding across the kitchen table, the keys on the counter, 47 employees and a notice on a door, a ring in a federal legal filing, a man in an apartment on Glenwood Avenue starting over. "I feel like things were what they were," I said. "And now, there's something else. And the something else is better." Patrice was quiet for a moment. Then, "Okay," she said. "I'll take that." A pause. "Come to dinner Saturday. Bring nothing. Just come." Okay, I said. I put my phone in my bag. I shut down my computer. I put on my coat and turned off my office light and walked down the hall past Helen's meeting room. Through the glass I could see her at the head of the table talking hands, moving the way they do when she's making a point she believes in. And I took the elevator down and walked through the lobby and out into the August evening. The air outside was warm and heavy, the way Atlanta air is in late summer, the city smelling of heat and rain that had fallen somewhere nearby and the particular green of trees that have been in the sun all day. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment before walking to the parking garage. Above me, the sky was doing something complicated and beautiful, with the last of the light the way skies sometimes do, at the end of days that have finally finished becoming what they were always going to be. I watched it for a moment. Then I walked to my car, and I drove home, and I made myself dinner. And I ate it at the table, with the windows open and the neighborhood coming in around me. And I did not feel small, and I did not feel large, and I did not feel like someone at the end of something. I felt like someone at the beginning. I moved in October, not far, 12 minutes from the Decatur house, which I had lived in for 7 years, and which had become in the 14 months since Marcus left something that fit differently, not painfully, but the way a coat fits when you've changed shape inside it. Still functional, just no longer quite right. The new apartment was on the 4th floor of a building in Midtown, 2 blocks from Piedmont Park. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the east side. Morning light that came in at an angle in October and landed on the kitchen floor in a shape that changed by the minute as the sun moved. A second bedroom I turned into an office with a desk I bought new, and a chair I chose entirely for how it felt to sit in for 8 hours and not for how it looked. I signed the lease on a Tuesday. I moved in on a Saturday. Renee and Patrice helped, which meant Renee directed and Patrice complained cheerfully, and I carried things with more efficiency than either of them thought was necessary for a moving day. By evening, we were sitting on the floor of the mostly empty living room, eating pizza from a box. And Renee was telling a story about a man she'd briefly dated who had named his car. And Patrice was laughing so hard she couldn't finish her slice. And I sat between them and felt something I recognized as happiness, not the performed variety, not the kind that requires an audience, but the quiet, domestic kind that lives in ordinary moments between people who know you well enough that you don't have to be anything other than what you are. To the new place, Patrice said, raising her water bottle. To the new place, Renee agreed. We touched bottles. Outside the window, Midtown Atlanta was doing its Saturday evening things lights coming on in the buildings across the park. The distant sound of something live. Playing somewhere the sky going from copper to deep blue in the particular unhurried way of fall evenings when the air is finally cool enough to make the colors matter. You look different, Renee said, watching me. I live somewhere different, I said. That's not what I mean, and you know it. I looked at her. My older sister, who had watched me be myself for 36 years, with the particular unsentimental accuracy of someone who loves you without needing you to be easier than you are. I know what you mean, I said. And I think you're right, I said. She nodded once satisfied and reached for another slice of pizza. The sentencing was in November. I did not attend. I followed it through the case notification system, a final email from Patricia Ngozzi's office at 3:44 p.m. on a Thursday. 2 sentences Diane Calloway had been sentenced to 66 months in federal prison and ordered to pay $4.3 million in restitution. Reporting date, January 15th. I read the email. I noted it. I closed the notification. I did not feel the thing I had occasionally imagined I would feel when this moment arrived, not the rush of vindication, not the satisfaction of a particular score settled. What I felt was completion. The way a file feels when you have documented everything that needed documenting, and the case is closed, and the work is done, and you can set it on the shelf. and trust that it is what it is. Some things are complete. That is enough. That is, in fact, a great deal. Helen called me into her office the following Monday. She was sitting behind her desk with a folder in front of her and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, which meant she was about to say something she wanted me to hear without the professional distance the glasses created. I sat across from her and waited. "The firm has been offered a 3-year federal forensic contract," she said, "larger than anything we've carried before. It will require a dedicated team lead." She paused. "I'd like it to be you." I looked at her. "It's a significant step up," she said. "Management responsibility, your own team of 4, involvement in case strategy from the intake stage. Different from the work you've been doing. More visible." She paused. "I want to be clear, I'm not offering this because of the Callaway case. Specifically, though, that work was exemplary. I'm offering it because I've watched you for 6 years, and I know what you're capable of. And I think you've been operating below the ceiling of what you can do." "Below the ceiling," I repeated. "You've been good at being invisible," Helen said, not unkindly. "I think you can afford to be a little less invisible now." I thought about that for a moment. The 4 blazers on rotation, the desk lunches, the careful professional smallness of a woman who does rigorous work and trusts the work to speak for itself without her having to stand next to it and announce its presence. I thought about a man who used to say, "You're too comfortable." I thought about how I had understood that as a criticism and carried it as one vaguely in a back corner where I kept things I hadn't fully examined. I thought about what comfortable actually meant. How it was possible to be comfortable in your own competence and have that be not a failure but a foundation. "Yes," I said. Helen looked at me for a moment. "That's it, just yes." "Was there more you needed?" I said. She almost smiled. The same almost smile as before in the doorway of my office the day of the arrest. Then she opened the folder. "Let's talk about the contract." We talked for an hour. I walked out of her office at 11:30 a.m. with a folder of my own and a start date for the new role of the 1st of December, and the particular feeling of a shape clicking into a space that had been waiting for it, not triumph, not relief, just the quiet rightness of a thing falling into its correct position. I called Dr. Okonkwo that evening. Not for a session, just a call. She picked up on the second ring, which was unusual, and I took it as a sign that the universe occasionally cooperates. "I got a promotion," I said. "I heard it in your voice before you said it," she said. "What did it sound like?" "Like someone who expected to feel more complicated about good news and is mildly surprised to find they just feel good." I laughed. Actual laughing, the kind that comes from somewhere unguarded. "That's accurate," I said. "How are you otherwise?" she said. "I'm well," I said. "Genuinely well. The Victoria version and the regular version are the same." "That's new," she said. "I know," I said. "It feels new." We talked for 20 minutes about what new felt like and how to not immediately make it complicated, which is a specific challenge for people built the way I am built. And then I thanked her and hung up and stood at my kitchen window looking at Piedmont Park in November. The park in November is a specific kind of beautiful. The trees stripped back the paths visible between the bare branches, the lake catching the afternoon light at the angle that makes it look briefly silver. You can see further in November than in any other month because there is less in the way. That used to feel like loss to me. The leaves gone, the fullness stripped the landscape, revealing its underlying structure without the softness that had covered it. It doesn't feel like loss anymore. Marcus called in December, once briefly. He had started a new position, business development, at a smaller company, modest, nowhere near the VP title he'd held, but solid. He sounded different in a way I didn't try to analyze too precisely. Less forward-leaning, more present to where he actually was. "I'm figuring out who I am when nobody's watching," he said. That's good work, I said. That's the important work. Yeah, he said. I'm starting to think so. We said goodbye without ceremony. I think we both understood without saying it that we were finished as the version of ourselves that existed in relation to each other. Not with bitterness, not with anything unresolved, just finished. Two people who had been something significant to each other and were now carefully and without drama becoming people who had once been that to each other. The shift that happens when a chapter ends and neither person tries to write themselves back into it. The December I moved into the new role, I bought a plant for my office, a pothos which is unkillable under most circumstances, and which Helen raised an eyebrow at, and which I placed in the corner near the window where the light came in strongest. I also bought for the apartment a turntable. Not his, mine. A different model, slightly better, which I set up on a Saturday afternoon, and on which I played first an Erykah Badu record that I had owned for 12 years and never properly listened to because we had always defaulted to his music on his turntable in his corner of what was supposed to be our shared life. The record sounded different in my own space. Everything sounds different in your own space. I have thought in the months since all of this about what I would tell a woman who was where I was 14 months ago, standing at a kitchen sink washing a mug, listening to a car pull out of a driveway for the last time. I have thought about what I wish someone had told me. I don't think there is a clean lesson. I don't think life resolves into lessons the way stories do. But there is something I know now that I didn't know then, or knew only technically in the way you know things before they become true in your body. Silence is not the same as stillness. You can be loud and frantic and still be entirely empty. You can be quiet and working and building something that nobody sees yet. The quietest things I did in that 14 months, documenting instead of confronting, disclosing, instead of hiding, staying on the case, instead of stepping away, signing the papers fast, sleeping through the night he left, those were not the things I did because I didn't care. They were the things I did because I understood what I was building, and I did not want to disturb it before it was done. You are always building something, even when it looks like you are doing nothing. Even when the people around you think you have been left behind, even when someone has driven away from a house you shared and taken most of the certainty with them. The work continues. The numbers don't lie. And the truth patient, unhurried, entirely indifferent to who is ready for it, always arrives exactly when it means to. I woke up on a Wednesday in January to morning light on my kitchen floor in a shape I hadn't seen before the sun had moved enough since October that the angle was new. The shape of it, new, landing somewhere it hadn't landed yet in this apartment that was mine entirely. I made coffee. I stood at the window. Below me, Piedmont Park was doing what it does in January. Stripped back clear the underlying structure of everything visible without ornamentation. I looked at it for a while. Then I picked up my coffee, went to my desk, and started work. The quietest thing I ever did was nothing. And it was enough. There is a version of this story where I am the woman who was left, where the central fact is the leaving and everything that follows is about recovering from it. I have thought about that version. I understand why it exists. It is easier to organize a life around what happened to you than around what you chose to do next. But that is not my version. My version is about what I already knew and what I chose to do with knowing it. It is about the difference between reacting and building, between making noise and making something, between performing your pain for an audience and doing the quiet, unglamorous work of continuing to be exactly who you are while the world rearranges itself around you. What I want to say to you, whoever you are, whatever time it is, wherever you are, whatever version of this story you recognize from your own life, is this. Your integrity is not invisible just because no one is acknowledging it. Your work is not wasted just because no one is watching. The woman who keeps going quietly, who documents instead of exploding, who signs the papers fast and sleeps through the first night and shows up Monday morning and does her job. She is not the woman who lost. She is the woman who knew what she was building. Be that woman, do that work. The truth is patient. So are you. And in the end, the quietest things are always the ones that last.